would score what I'll call out of their range. And there would be, you'd see this both on the low end and the high end, where somebody who would go into the exam who was kind of a 700 or above level score, they would only get a certain number of very difficult questions. So if they got all the easy questions right, but then for whatever reason on a few of the difficult questions they actually got them wrong, that might bump them out of the 700 range. Conversely, somebody who was a lower score, they might be able to guess on some of the really difficult questions, and they might actually be able to get those difficult questions right. And if that's the case, then they might score way above what what their typical band would be. So the computer adaptive testing is actually good because it's going to be a more accurate indicator of your true abilities on the exam. And again, if you understand how computer adaptive testing works, it's actually something that works in your favor. So some of the general principles of the GMAT. The first thing that I tell everybody is learn the fundamentals. So when it comes to the GMAT, there's a number of things that are just standard. Know the principles of a 30, 60, 90 triangle. Know with sentence correction, when a long answer is right versus a short answer. These are some things that, it's drilling, it's repetition, it's going in and it's doing old-fashioned study. There's no tips or tricks here. To learn the fundamentals, what I typically recommend to people is to buy a couple of practice books. The Princeton Review book is very good. The Kaplan book is very good. There are a number of others out there, but if all you did is buy Princeton Review and Kaplan and go through the fundamentals in those books, and it'll set you back, $50 or something like that. That's a great way to get a firm foothold on the fundamentals. GMATtutor.com, as I mentioned before, the website that I used to run, is a good website. There's a lot of good information on there. There's a good math worksheet on there with a lot of the basics that you'll need to know on math. And the one thing about fundamentals is repetition is extremely important. You really want to know the basics cold on test day. You want to go into the exam not having any doubt about what formula it is for the circumference of a circle. I mean, those are things that you want to have drilled into your head and be ready to go on test day. So I strongly recommend to people learn the fundamentals, do a lot of repetition, make flashcards, do a lot of practice problems that involve having to recall the fundamentals, take actual practice exams. This is something that I mentioned on the article that I posted earlier on, which I'll repost here in the chat log for you guys. One of the things that I recommend is make sure you're taking actual practice exams in preparation, because that level of pressure, that level of kind of having to recall things on a timely basis is something that you want to emulate prior to the exam. So that's definitely something to keep in mind. Become really good at test taking. Get good at process of elimination. So one of the things about the GMAT is, outside of the analytical writing assessment, all the questions on the GMAT are multiple choice. So one of the skills that's most important is getting really good at eliminating what the wrong answers, or what that the correct answers aren't, right? So getting rid of the wrong answers. And one of the things that this is really important for is data sufficiency. So when you get to the data sufficiency section, or the data sufficiency questions on the exam in the math section, process elimination can be your best friend, because when you look at data sufficiency questions, and again, don't have time to get into the details, the mechanics of this tonight, but when you look at data sufficiency questions and you look at that first piece of data and you determine, yes, this piece of data is sufficient, or no, this piece of data is not sufficient, you can immediately eliminate certain answer choices based off of knowing that. So process elimination, easy for me to say, is a very important part of becoming good at test taking. Now, what I recommend to students is, when you sit down to take each section of the exam, what you want to do is you want to go ahead and take your scratch paper and you want to create basically a grid. And in that grid, what you want to have is you want to have a listing at the top of all of, you want to have a column for every single question. So it'll be 37 columns for math, and it'll be 41 columns for verbal. And then going down, you want to have a row for all 5 answer choices. And you want to use this grid basically as your scratch paper, and you want to eliminate answer choices that you know are incorrect by using this grid. A lot of people try to do it in their head. It's not the best idea. When you're looking at a computer screen, you're trying to eliminate improper answer choices by simply visualizing. It's really hard to do, and you can end up losing track of which answer choices you've marked as incorrect or as incorrect. So I always tell people, first thing you do, get there, put that grid in place, use that grid to mark off the answer choices that you know are incorrect. Helps you so much in terms of getting to the correct answer. Another thing is assess how difficult a question should be, and this gets back to what we were talking about before with easy questions. If you know you're a 700 level test taker and you get a question that looks extremely easy, you're much more likely to want to look for a trap. If you're scoring at the 700 level or even at the 600 level, you're going to find that there are going to be questions that are going to require 2, 3, sometimes 4 steps. If you're scoring at the 400 level or the 500 level, most of your questions are going to be much more simple. So know how well you typically score, and then use that to help you determine whether or not you need to think more about a question, whether you need to look for a trap, whether you should be doing 3 or 4 steps on a math problem. The third principle is think like the test maker. One of the best ways to score really well in the GMAT is actually to sit down and write a few GMAT questions up. By writing up some questions, you'll see some of the things that test makers do. You'll think to yourself, okay, well, what tricky answer choice can I put in here? Maybe it's an incomplete answer choice where someone's performed 2 steps but not 3 steps of a math question. That'll be my answer choice. You'll start to see patterns emerging if you try to actually write out questions. But even if you don't write out questions, just thinking like the test maker, think about how someone would try to trip me up here. And one of the best ways to do this is to do a lot of questions, look through a lot of answer explanations. You'll start to see those patterns emerge. A big part of scoring well in the GMAT is simply pattern recognition. It's knowing, I haven't seen that exact question before, but I've seen one like it which had the same type of principles involved, and I've answered that one this way, so now I know how to answer this other one. And the final thing that I always tell people is get yourself ready for peak performance. And this is different for everybody. Some people really struggle with test anxiety. They can do great on practice exams, but when they actually get into the testing room, they have a very difficult time. And so this isn't something that's really important for you to know about yourself. Have you scored, really well on tests in the past? Did you score well on the PSAT? Did you score well on the SAT? Or have you scored very poorly, at least relative to your abilities on these exams? It's extremely important to do certain things that get you ready to go on test day. It might be a workout the night before. It might be a good night of sleep. It might be a good breakfast. Everyone is different in that regard. And so what I typically recommend to people is do a few trial runs. So maybe 3 weeks before the actual exam. Let's say you're going to take the exam on a Tuesday morning at 11 o'clock. Do a practice exam on Tuesday morning at 11 o'clock, and notice, how does the amount of sleep that I got the night before affect me? How does, what I ate that morning? How does what I did before the exam affect me? These are things that you can prepare for. Think about Olympic athletes preparing, doing training. What they're going to do is they're going to try to put themselves in kind of the same routines, the same type of situations to basically replicate the performance that they want to see at the actual event. So you should do the same thing when you're taking a test. And this was why it's really important too when you study, and I'll refer you again to the 10 ways to hack your exam link there. But when you study, try when you study to put yourself in that same sort of a position. So the best way to study, and we'll go through this quickly because I definitely want to save about 10 minutes at the end for Q&A. So first, assess the following. How much do you want to improve? Now, some people come in to studying for the GMAT and they say, you know what, I want to improve 20 points. Hey, you know what, that's great. If all you want to improve is 20 points, a few tips and tricks here and there, understanding computer adaptive testing, maybe a practice test or two, you should have no problem bumping your score up 20 or 30 points. Then you get other people who say, I want to improve my score 200 points. That's a bigger challenge. If you scored a 500 on a practice exam, or even on a real exam, and then you want to score 700, that's tough. Having said that, I've seen people do it. In fact, when I was a Kaplan, I spent a lot of time tutoring a lady who had scored a 500 on her first exam. It was an actual exam, and her goal was to get into Columbia. And at Columbia, I think the average score at the time was maybe 710 or 720. So we spent a lot of time together. We drilled on the fundamentals. She took every single practice exam she could get her hands on, and I don't know how many hours we spent together. It was a lot of time. She ended up scoring a 700 on her second go around. So it is possible to improve your score that much, but be aware that if that's what you're looking to do, that's going to require a Herculean effort. So a lot of this kind of corresponds to how much time you can devote to studying. Some people say I can only devote an hour a week. That's it. I'm busy. I've got a family. I've got a job. People going to business school, they typically are pretty stretched time-wise. Okay, great. So yeah, I see. I froze a little bit just there. Okay, cool. Glad it's better. We were having internet connection